Hey y'all. Okay, we are going to talk about classifying plants. So for this little section, we're going to be able to classify plants and also differentiate between a monocot and a dicot. And we'll talk about what those two phrases mean because it's probably a new term for y'all. Now with plants, we need to talk about what kind of plants. For this unit, we look at mosses, ferns, and flowering plants. For your notes, we're really going to dive into ferns first and then flowering plants. Now for ferns, ferns are going to be unique because they do not flower. So they don't produce pretty flowers, but y'all can see this image behind me. Here is a fern. It's beautiful. Most people put them on their front porch in the spring and summer. And they are unique because they reproduce with spores. So they don't reproduce in the typical way we think of with flowers. They grow spores on the underside of the leaves. And as they reproduce, it is this is the way that it is carried out for ferns. Now, they do have a root system, stems, and leaves, so that's why we can classify them as a plant. And then if we move on to flowering plants. So flowering plants are your typical flowering plants. So if I use this screen, you can see we've got sunflowers that fall into this that are so beautiful. Any type of flower is going to be considered a plant that's a flowering plant. Now, when we look at that, they still have the same roots, stem, and leaves. They reproduce sexually, though. So this is where ferns reproduce asexually. Flowers are going to reproduce sexually with flowers and seeds. And there's two main types of flowering plants, a monocot and a dicot. The fancier phrase is monocotyledonous and dicotyledonous, but kind of a mouthful, so we usually shorten it. Now, you'll see in your notes today that you have several things to draw on a diagram, and it's basically this right here, where we can look at the characteristics. Their seeds are very specific. This is where they actually get their names from. With this corn seed here, you've got just one single cotyledon, and this would be an example of like a bean seed, where there's two cotyledons because it splits open, where the corn is just one individual one. A dicot splits open when it is sprouting. Leaves for monocots, the parallel lines on them. So remember, parallel, I remember it with the two L's in the center. They're parallel because those two L's. So monocot, like the number one, think parallel. Like your ones look like L's, right? And then for dicots, we have branched veins in our leaves. The flowers are different. For a monocot, the floral parts are often in multiples of 3. So think the flower petals would be in sets of 3, 6, 9, 12. So think in terms of 3. And then for dicots, floral parts often in multiples of 4 or 5. So think 4s or 5s. The stem for a monocot, the vascular bundles are scattered throughout the stem in no exact pattern. But for dicots, the bundles are arranged in a very specific ring. And then the roots, you can just determine them from roots. For monocots, the roots are very fibrous and spread out. But in dicots, typically, they have a taproot. So think like a carrot that grows straight down. That's what a taproot is. Okay, those are great ways to differentiate between monocots and dicots, and you have a diagram to draw all these different things at the bottom of your notes today. So go ahead and get started so you will be ready for your Check for Understanding quiz when we see each other again.